Okay, welcome back. We're on to Module 5. In this module, we're going to be talking about pivot tables. One of the most powerful things that you can do in Excel is a pivot table. So we're going to be teaching you how to do pivot tables and how to manipulate them, and hopefully you get some use out of these. So what we need to do first in order to create a pivot table, right off the bat, you need to have your data organized into rows and columns. So the data set that you have as part of these modules is already organized into rows and columns. But for example, if we had, we're just going to insert a random column here. If we had a column that was blank here and we wanted to create a pivot table out of this, Excel wouldn't let us do it because we have a blank column in the way. So we'd have to get rid of that column. So I'm just going to delete that out of the way. Now, in order to create a pivot table, all you need to do is select your upper leftmost cell. We're going to do Control Shift over, so it highlights the first row. Control Shift down, so it highlights our entire data set. So all of our values are selected. What we're going to do is we are going to say up at the top, we're going to click on Insert and then Pivot Tables, and it's going to have a pop-up. And because we've already selected our data, it's going to already come up with our range here. If we hadn't selected our data, we could put select this button and then highlight it, but we're gonna go with it as is. Choose where you want the pivot table to be placed. The best practice is in a new worksheet, simply because the pivot table takes up a lot of space on a sheet and you don't want to have to worry about it interfering with your other data. So my advice and best practice is to always put it in a new sheet. And then we're going to hit OK. And here's our pivot table. So what we're going to do is teach you how to build a pivot table. And in its very basic form, a pivot table is simply a way to summarize data that in a way where you don't have to write formulas. And so it will give us a very, very quick and easy way to manipulate, to mine data, to check for errors, all of these kinds of things you can use a pivot table for. So let's jump right in. Hopefully you get the gist as we go. Now, the best way to start off a pivot table is to think about the values that you're going to be looking at. In our case, what I want to focus on is the counts of number of people in various different categories. So, for example, we're going to look at gender, we're going to look at the work country, etc. So what I'm going to do is, because we know that each person has a unique identification number, we're going to drag that down into values. Now, that's going to look pretty funny because our value here is 125,250. Well, and that's because Excel automatically by default adds up all of those numbers. So what we want to do is come down here to values and click on the arrow. We're going to do field value settings and we're going to click on count. So we want it to count those values, not sum those values. We're going to say OK. And there we go. There's our 500 people. Now, the cool thing about the pivot table is that we can now slice and dice this 500 people in any way that we want. So, for example, if we want to see males versus females, all we need to do is drag gender down into the rows box down here. And there we go. We have 364 males and 136 females. Let's say that we want to look at work country. Well, all we need to do is drag gender out and look at work country, drag that in, and here we go. There's all of our work countries. Here's all of the people that we have in each of those work countries. And the cool thing about pivot tables too is that if you click here and right click, you can say sort largest to smallest, and now we know where all of our people sit. So it's a very, very easy way to look at how do we stand up, where do we stand in different countries, how many people. Let's say we want to look at males and females in each of those countries. All we need to do is pull gender down into our columns box down here. And there we go. So in the United States, we have 30 females, 73 males, and 103 total, etc., etc. Let's take a look at job title. So if we look at job title, there's we should note when we take out the country, you can see this is total. So total, we have 136 females, 364 males. Let's look at job title. We're going to throw that into rows. Chief engineer, we have 4 females, 17 males. Engineer 1, 4 versus 18, etc., etc. You can see down the line. So let's take a look at, let's say we want to look at percentages. And we want to say, okay, this is all fine and good, but what does it really mean, and how can I start to tell a story with all of this? Well, we can do this really easily in Excel as well. And what we can do is come down here to our values, and we go to field value settings, and we can say show values as. Right now it's no calculation, it's just going to count them and spit out the numbers for us. But let's say we want to do show values as row total, because we want to know in our chief engineers how many of them, what percentage are female, what percentage are male. So we're going to do row total, we're going to say OK, and here we go. And we can see it tells a pretty interesting story, right? So it looks like we have, 20%, around 20% female in the kind of chief engineer, engineer 1, engineer 2, engineer 3. Then when we get to senior engineer, uh, it jumps to 34, almost 35%. And then the vice president of engineering is 100%. That person is a female. So, interesting kind of stories that you can tell by looking at these data and mining them using pivot tables. Again, pivot tables take a while to learn and to play around with. You can change also the design of your pivot table, so you can look at all sorts of different colors and graphics, however you want to do it. So you can make them darker or lighter, whatever the case may be. So I would say my advice is to play around with them. They are again super powerful, but take a little bit of playing around to learn sometimes. But are a really powerful tool. A couple other things that I want to show you before we get rid of pivot tables. Let's change this back to no calculation. I'm going to say OK. So here are our raw values again. Let's say that we want to, instead of seeing females versus males here, we want to filter that by females and males. So instead of columns, we're going to say gender. We want that to be a filter. And so we're going to come up here, and our filter is now gender. You can see up at the top. The drop down is here. Let's say we want to look at only females. There you go. There's females. Only males is here. And then everyone, again, is our 500. So again, very easy to manipulate pivot tables and use them to start to tell your story. A lot of the work that we do in HR doesn't require really anything more than a pivot table. You would be surprised how many people coming out of graduate school don't know how to use a pivot table. So I would say this is one of the most important skills that you can learn in the program, and hopefully you'll learn it here before the program. But I would say definitely spend some time with pivot tables and understand how they work. Another cool thing about pivot tables is that we can insert pivot charts, which basically takes the data that we use in a pivot table, that we have in a pivot table, and puts it into a chart. And so what we can do here is we can put in a pivot chart. So if we click on Insert and Pivot Chart, it will ask us kind of what chart do we want to look at, or what type of chart. In this case, I'm going to keep it a clustered column. We could actually, no, I'm going to change that to a stacked column because I think that helps tell the story a little bit better. And so if you hover over the picture here, it shows you what that chart's going to look like if you do in fact select it. So it's kind of cool. So you can kind of try it before you buy it, so to speak. But you can pick all sorts of different charts, pie charts and all sorts of things. But again, we're going to stick to column and stacked column and hit OK. And there's our chart. The really, really cool thing about pivot charts and pivot tables is that as you modify the pivot table, so let's click on, let's say we don't want to show our vice president of engineering because it's only one person. You can deselect that, you hit OK, and the pivot chart updates as well. So everything updates as you go, which is a really, really good feature because you can kind of play around with it, and oftentimes people are visual learners and they can learn better by looking. So this is a really great way as you're playing around with pivot tables. Sometimes I'll just throw in a pivot chart even if I'm not going to use it in a PowerPoint or anything, or even if I'm not going to use it in the presentation that I'm putting together, I'll throw a pivot chart out there just so as I'm playing with the data I can look at it more visually and see things more easily. We'll take job title out Here's our total again because we've got male versus female. Let's throw in manager of people, which is either yes or no. So this starts to become interesting, right? In terms of our counts and percentages. Let's see what the percentages look like. Show values as, we'll say here, percentage of row total. Hit OK. So now you can see that they're 100% because we have 100% as the grand total. So of those who are managers of people, 28% are women and 71% are male. Of those who are not managers of people, 26% are female, 73% are male. So it looks like the balance is a little bit tilted in favor of females, which is interesting as well. So those are pivot charts and pivot tables. And let's do one more with our most recent performance rating. We'll put that in. And just to check, when we get into things like males versus females and things, it becomes kind of interesting when we look at these. So, it looks like we're about equal across. Maybe a little dip here in the 5s and the 4s, but again, this would require much more analysis to determine if there's any kind of discrimination going on or anything like that. So something to look into, though, and very easy to pick out and to point out using a pivot table and a pivot chart. Another interesting one would be age. So if we take out most recent performance, we're going to take out gender as well. And let's do, again, we're going to do, no, we'll leave it as is. What we're going to do is we're going to take age and throw that into rows. And I'm going to change this chart to be, let's see here, design, quick layout, change chart type. That's what we want. We're going to do line, a line chart, and this is saying 100% all the way across because we're in percentages. So I am going to change this to show values as no calculation. Hit OK. There we go. That's what we wanted. So now we can see our age across the entire company. And we can see that we have a clear spike here in, what age is this? 39. And then it goes down, drops. So again, we probably want to investigate, kind of figure out what's going on here. You can see that it tapers off here, likely around retirement. We've got we're hiring in very few people right out of school, and then we're hiring some mid-level. Looks like we've got some retention issues here with our kind of entry levels and older folks as well. So it'd be interesting too to look at tenure. So if we take age out and we drop in tenure, you can do the same, and you can see here, all around. Let's see, it looks like 10 years of tenure. We've got a big spike here. For some reason, it drops dramatically at 9. Don't know why. Maybe something to investigate. And then it's a steady decrease here as we get into our higher tenure. So pretty interesting data that we're looking at. Again, very, very easy to do and very, very easy to look at here. You can stick in something like, job title. If we look at our, if you want to look at your various jobs, you can do that. So it makes the graph a little bit funky. Let's do something with a little fewer lines. So we'll throw in gender again and see. So here's our females versus males. You can see kind of those line breaks mean that we have no females in this tenure category. So it might be something going on here. Looks like very similar trends, except for kind of these breaks in the action here. So this may be when women are dropping out of the workforce for families or whatever the case may be. But again, it definitely requires some looking into, as these are kind of just very basic insights. But certainly, if you know the organization, if you're working with the organization, you can glean some pretty interesting insights here. So these are pivot tables and pivot charts. Hopefully you learned something here today, and as I said, this is one of the most powerful tools that we can use within Excel. When we talk about our last module, putting it all together, we'll come back to these, and I'll show you how to insert some of these into a PowerPoint to help tell the story.